Welcome back. This would be episode 5 of the Nintendo Dual Versus System restoration. So in my previous videos, we did a teardown on a control panel, rebuilt some joysticks, rebuilt some buttons, or well, at least polished up and cleaned up some buttons. We drilled out some locks, and finally we did a strip down one of the control panels in preparation for paint. So in this episode, what I'm going to focus on is actually doing a teardown on the entire unit. So at least get it down to no red portions. The tenty part of the tent is going to come off. We're going to pull the monitors. We're going to look at the harness, see about what we can do as far as getting that tucked inside for the eventual paint. And well, I mean, really, we're just going to see how far we can get. I want to get one of these things torn completely down. Now, this isn't the one that I have been showing. This is one of the new ones that I picked up. But I wanted to. This one's actually pretty well complete as far as it's all the bits and pieces are still on here. So it seemed like a better candidate to do a full teardown on. So, full disclosure here, I have not yet actually torn one of these down from a fully assembled state. So this is going to be a little bit of a learning process for all of us here. So with that said, I've got a real simple set of tools here: a screwdriver, just a Phillips head screwdriver, a set of sockets, and a socket driver. And that's pretty much all I've got here in front of me. I may need a couple other little pieces as we go through this here and there. But the tools for putting these things together and taking them apart, pretty darn simple. So most of this stuff, to begin with at least here, pretty simple. So the red tent, you know, it does rotate up like so. And on the door here, we're going to start by pulling that off. There's just a single Molex connector here for the switches on the coin door. It's got a little tab on it. A lot of these things do these little pressure tabs that keep it kind of stuck together. So make sure to push those. If otherwise you could just end up yanking on the wires. You can pull the connections out here. You can break this plastic. The plastic is old stuff, so you want to go easy on it. So that's now disassembled. And in this case, we've got a set of just Phillips head drivers here. So I want to make sure to pull the shroud part of this off, the red tent part of it off, before I start disassembling all of this stuff. We're putting a lot of pressure on this very thin gauge, these very thin gauge hinges here. So the most you can do with that off, I think the better you're going to be, rather than just, you know, running the risk of distorting the metal, that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and start pulling these guys. And I'm going to leave one in on both sides, because I'm going to need to brace this thing once I start getting to the point where it's clear. So I'm just going to gently loosen these guys, make sure they're not going to be tricky to do, because what I'm going to do now, you can see there, it wants to fall over. So I'm going to go around back and brace it with my body. That is the last of the screws. You can see here we're clear, and that's all there is to pulling off the shroud. Pretty simple. Right now I've been kind of collecting all the hardware in my hands. I'm going to make sure I've got all 6 of the screws, which I do. What I like to do when I'm pulling hardware off is if you get these like little magnetic plates. This one happens to be off of my floor jack, but I've got a couple of other ones. But they're nice. They've got a magnetic surface, so it just grabs all of your hardware pretty easily. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be splitting these hardware pieces up into separate baggies, and then labeling those. That way, this will be like, I'll just call this, shroud hardware or something along those lines. And that way, when I'm going back to do reassembly, I know what baggie has what hardware in it. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So what I've got there is a very, very stubborn screw, and these little brass screws, you can strip them out pretty easily. All right, so I don't know what's on that screw or why it's holding tight, but I'm going to use a little bit of it's PV Blaster, but any kind of penetrating oil. Again, I don't want to strip those screws out, so I'm going to go ahead and just spray a little bit of this on. Hopefully that'll help knock it loose. And then I can come back in. I'm going to keep working on the other side while this is doing its thing, getting a little soaking in there. And I'm just using just a tiny bit and let it just kind of soak in. So we'll put this side down for now. And let that penetrating oil do its work. So, what else can we do on this side? Well, we do have stuff we can get to here. Now, I've already pulled the PCB that was on here, so nothing to pull there. But we can look at the monitor. So I know that I think there's 4 connections on the monitor that we need to pull. Or off of the monitor. So there's power, video signal, there's a ground, and I think there's a line that runs to the speakers. So before we can really get the monitor pulled, we should really make sure to trace down those wires and get those pulled first. You don't want to be getting to the point where you're lifting. And luckily, these are only 18-inch monitors, so they're not crazy heavy. You're not like you're lugging around some, 27-inch monitor out of one of the driving games or something like that. That's just super heavy. These are relatively easy to lug around, but still, you don't want to be pulling this thing out and have it like catching on stuff or yanking on the chassis for the monitor. All right, so to start with, we've got looks like a red and white cable in here. That looks like it's running down to the speaker. So that will be connection number 1. And it's got a little Molex connector on the end here. So just again, it's old plastic, so go easy on them. that one's on there pretty good. All right. Wow. All right. Well, so that's clear now. What else we got here? So just tuck that into the monitor chassis so it doesn't catch anything as we're pulling it out. Might need to open up the other side to get at the other power supply over here on the left-hand side of what I'm looking at here. That's they do plug in over there, so we might have to go back to tackling this stripping or wanting to strip nut on this side here. Let's see if maybe that penetrating oil has had a chance to soak in a little bit. Maybe that's going to free it up now. Not having good luck today. Okay, so the drill was not on the list of tools that I wanted to use today on this project. But that screw head just stripped out like all crazy. Not happy about having to drill that out, but you know what? Sometimes these things just happen. All right, so I got that screw head out of there, so I can go ahead and finish pulling this thing now. It's a bummer when stuff like that happens. It's trying to salvage as much of this stuff as possible, but sometimes there's just nothing you can do. So again, just holding this up as I take out these last couple screws here. And she is now free. Okay, so now we can get to the other side of the monitor, and I can see straight down here there are 2 plugs for each of the monitors sticking out of the power supply in the bottom here. Uh, it's the only thing in the bottom of the cabinet that's going to look like, you know, your standard 2-prong outlet. So know what those are when you're pulling them out. So both of those are now clear. So there's another part of the harness that runs up here from the monitor to here. So another little push button here on the connector, and that'll slide right out. And then here's the last one. This is that, I think this was a ground wire for the monitor. Same thing, it's got a little push button on it, and that just slid right out. So that's a piece of cake. So those will come out with the rest of the monitor frame. Still going to go slow here. I'm looking around the back side of the monitor for anything else that might prevent us from being able to remove it safely without interfering with anything else. I'm not seeing anything on this side. So we'll swing the camera back around to the front. And all we have, theoretically, left to pull is, in each of the 4 corners of the monitor, is just a simple Phillips headed bolt here. So I'm just loosening up all 4 of them. Make sure that I don't have any problems releasing them like I did the other ones. And it looks like it's just, yeah, Phillips head, and it's got a nice big brass washer here. So keep those, because obviously those washers you're going to need for holding it in. I think these screws I've seen a lot of other places on the body. So that seems like kind of a universal part. So make sure to keep those washers, because that's going to, without the washer, you're not going to be able to hold the monitor in very securely. The monitor shouldn't go anywhere. It's actually sitting on, there's a bottom lip that the frame actually rests on. So as long as the entire unit is sitting flat, you shouldn't have a problem with the monitor going anywhere. Gravity's kind of doing you a favor there. And that should be it. So now I'm going to start moving this thing out slowly. And if I feel any resistance anywhere, I mean, I did just drop the power cable back there, so theoretically that could catch on something. I'm seeing around this side that it looks like it should be clear. I think I can go ahead and just pull it out the front. Not a bad idea there. So everything should be fine. Now, when you grab the monitor, when you're touching any arcade monitor, any CRT arcade monitor, you need to treat these things with a great deal of respect. They can hold a tremendous charge of electricity, which can certainly hurt, and potentially do even more damage. So when you're working with CRT monitors, do lots of research online. Don't think that this is going to be a comprehensive video about how to handle monitors. Do your research. You're responsible for your own safety here. The other thing is that the tube itself is in a vacuum. So if anything happens to it, first off, it can implode. And secondly, you're going to be out of tube. So these 18-inch tubes are not easy to find. A lot of the 19-inch tubes and some of the 25-inch tubes, you can do swaps on those and go get, you know, old TVs that have these tubes. But these 18 inches are not so common. So be very, very, very careful for your own safety and for the safety of your equipment. So only grab it by the frame. Don't start reaching around and grabbing onto electronics. Don't grab onto anything except for the frame at this point. You're working a little bit blind, so, you know, with this one where it's set back. So be very careful, and you want to take it out, pull it out straight towards you. Mind the lip here and mind the lip down here. You know what, actually, it's not a bad idea. I'm going to go ahead and pull the joysticks as well. I don't think it's really not likely to happen, but just to make sure that, you know, these things don't catch as I'm pulling out. So the control panels, 4 bolts across the top. and then just make sure to disconnect the harness that are going to the controls here. So start with the four screws on the top here. And I am making piles for my hardware here. I really need to actually probably go grab a couple Ziploc bags and there's another one that's really tight. Um, get a Ziploc bag and get these things organized. Maybe as soon as I'm done with the control panel here, before I pull the monitor, I will go ahead and get that taken care of. Just again, keep these things marked. There's a lot of the hardware is very similar, like I said, with the other one, where the bolts that hold the monitor in appear to be used throughout the entire frame of this thing. But still, I mean, you know, you don't want to be hunting for these things. And it's awfully nice to just be able to grab a baggie that has, you know, monitor bolts in it, and then you're done. Okay, so that's the 4 bolts across the top here. Control panel will need to slide slightly out towards you, as I mentioned in my previous video. And then hopefully I've got enough slack here. Maybe not. There's 2 Molex connectors here running up to the control panel. There's actually a wire tie kind of thing in here that's holding that back. I'm gonna go ahead and pull these things. I don't know if you can see that over the monitor. It's not terribly exciting. It's just yet another Molex connector with a little lock on it. This thing, and I'll show you as I dig into it. This thing uses these black metal, they're bendable kind of ties, wire ties all over the place. Which, you know, it is nice. You know, keeps it's Nintendo actually that my Donkey Kong has these all over it too. Hopefully, I don't know if you can see that, but if not, I'll show them off later. So yeah, so it's just these little metal bendy things, and you know, you use those to wrap the harness up to keep it from kind of going anywhere. Unfortunately, it's impeding my ability to get the other half of this control panel harness off. I think pretty sure. And note that I'm reaching underneath the monitor. I'm not actually reaching back into onto the frame or anything like that. Should not be anything dangerous underneath here. Again, don't take my word for it. Do your research. Know what you're grabbing. All right. So that's the control panel. I'll add that to the giant pile of control panels. Yeah, I have a lot of control panels. I actually started stripping them down for the other ones yesterday. Anyway. All right, so now, monitor. So again, by the frame only, straight towards you. Be very, very, very careful. I don't feel anything resisting me, nothing holding me from pulling this out. So, we are clear. Wow, so you're not going to believe this. Over there, setting the monitor down, and out from behind the neck board falls this, the coin mech. You look at this other monitor, it was stuck in right there, and I for some reason I didn't even notice it. Ridiculous. Anyway, that's one monitor out, and I can see by looking inside of this thing. Well, I can see another coin mech. I just noticed something while I was pulling these bolts out, just loosening them up a little bit. That little lip that I was talking about, the monitor resting on, this one is not resting on that. So before I finish removing all the hardware, I'm going to slip this guy back up into where it's supposed to be. I may loosen these up a little bit more. But I'm not pulling them out entirely. I just want to make sure that this thing is fully secure before I remove all the hardware. I know that's probably almost impossible to see, but you could see where, hopefully where my finger is, that the lip of this, that has to be holding the monitor up. That is key to how it keeps it from sliding down. So at some point this was loosened or something, but either way, it's not sitting where it should be. So be sure to make sure that that is resting where it needs to be. Otherwise, I mean, if it slips down, I mean, who knows what's going to happen. But again, treat these things with much respect. So next, I'm going to remove the red painted portion from the crossbar here. This bar holds the section of the wiring harness and provides stability for the brackets, which hold the bolts that hold the top of the monitors. So there's just a series of Phillips-headed bolts which screw into the red portion through the black bar underneath here, and those just need to be removed. Once those are clear, the last portion should lift straight off with no difficulties. With the red parts removed, I can now remove the rest of the wiring harness from this top bar so I can get good access to the remaining bolts which hold the top black bar in place. Now that the wiring harness is no longer attached, these large bolts can easily be removed. So normally I would remove the metal and wood bracket that holds the PCB before pulling the top bar out, but I've got another stubborn bolt here on the top, and I'll get that off later. Um, it's just a bit too tricky getting tools in here and fighting with this thing. So luckily these bolts, rather than the other ones, they've got heads which protrude enough to be able to get a pair of pliers on them to turn them, so I won't need to pull out that drill again. So before we can remove the control panel frame, I need to remove the coin chutes, the gray chutes here that capture the coins and then either send them into the coin bucket or send it back towards the coin return if it's a rejected coin. And the coin return slots which go through the front of the cabinet on both sides. Just use two Phillips head screws here on the top and then a single nut on the bottom attached to the coin bucket box. The coin return slot is attached by two similar Phillips screws which just go through the body. So this is that small nut on the bottom, and with that the coin chute can come right out. Then there's just the two small Phillips head screws which hold the coin return slot and go through the body, connect to the coin return door, and the little trim frame that sits on the outside. And this is another part that's going to need some polishing. But for now, I'm going to temporarily reassemble these things, and that way I can keep all the parts together. You know, I've got a ton of polishing to do between these parts, the metal parts that are, the rest of the metal parts on the front of the door here, and then of course the legs are going to require on all these things quite a bit of polishing. You know, I am going to go as far as painting these things and doing some body work on them, but I am not going to re-chrome these legs. It's just the expense is not worth it. I'd probably have to ship them off because as far as I know, there's no one here in town who actually does chroming anymore. So I'd have to package them all up and ship them all off, and it's just really, I mean, the cost is just ridiculous. So there's just no way I can do that. A good polish though, will work wonders, I think, on these legs for the most part. I didn't see any real significant damage on them, so I think they're going to come out really nice. I know I've talked about using hand tools for disassembly of a lot of these parts, but I had so many seized bolts on this cabinet that I'm going to use an impact driver to help me back some of these bolts out. An impact driver, they're great, and this is exactly what they're used for. Basically, if you don't know what an impact driver is, an impact driver acts just like a regular power drill or driver, with just one additional really important feature. So while it's spinning, it also delivers it delivers the power in very short bursts, both rotationally and then it also it kind of hammers in vertically. So basically, this has the effect of breaking seized parts loose with the shock of these little blows, these little twist blows, and these little downforce blows. Um, it's kind of like someone tapping a hammer on the back of your driver, um, and while simultaneously kind of turning the screwdriver with little taps as well, like if you can imagine if that were possible. Um, It works brilliantly, and it can significantly reduce the risk of stripping bolt heads, since it's using the shock of the blows to loosen things instead of just sort of the linear force of a regular drill motor against the heads of the bolts. So to remove the control panel tray, there's just a series of Phillips-headed screws, these same screws that you find all over these things, which run around the perimeter of the body. And again, rather than risk stripping these things out, I'm going to use the impact driver again. So with all those screws loosened and the second coin chute and the coin return parts removed, I can go ahead and safely remove the remaining Phillips-headed bolts. Now I just need to remove the large bolts, which attach the legs to the T-framed parts, which the legs slide into on the sides here. And now the control panel frame just slides right off the top. For now, I'm going to leave I'm going to leave the rest of the body intact for now. All that's really left is the harness, which is basically free. It's just resting in the bottom. The test switches, the speakers, the power supply, and the isolation transformer. So I guess that's a few things, but I still have that to pull apart. But I want to set up a short video of how I'm going to test the electronics on these parts that I have to find out if I need to order anything while this stuff is getting paint. So I'll shoot that video of testing all the electronics in like I said, maybe the next video. And then maybe afterwards I'll do a super short finishing the disassembly of the rest of these bodies as well, just to kind of wrap things up. So let's take a look at disassembly of the door. To start with, remove the 4 bolts holding the bezel glass, tinted plexiglass, and the frame that holds it all together. Basically all of these parts are things you really kind of want to get clear before working on the rest of the door. The cardboard bezel here, it's just cardboard. It's like a poster board kind of stuff, a thick poster board, but paper nonetheless. And you really don't want to crush that. And the plexiglass, the tinted plexiglass on the top here, that can be scratched pretty easily. So best just to go ahead and get those fragile parts out of the way first, before you start tackling the rest of this. There are 4 nuts on each of the corners which go through the door and attach the front plate to the door. And then on either side of the coin mechs here, there are Phillips-headed screws which need to be loosened. I just noticed while I was taking this thing apart, it would be a lot easier to remove the brackets which hold the coin mechs in place before trying to remove those lower screws for the coin chutes. So I'll go ahead and get those pulled off first. I didn't have a box end or an open-ended wrench that was small enough for these things, so I'm going to have to use a crescent wrench instead. It's a bit fiddly in this tight area with this medium-sized wrench, but it'll do the trick nonetheless. Note that the coin mechs are not in these brackets right now, but hey, you know what? Don't worry, I found them inside the monitor frames, so we're good there. Now with those out of the way, I can get at the last 2 screws holding the coin chutes, the little guides that run from the coin slots in the front door into the coin mechs, so that the coins can then be validated for size and weight and all the rest of that stuff. So I'm going to partially reassemble these parts as well, just to keep everything together until I'm ready to polish them. These locks are very simple to remove with just a nut on the end, which allows you to remove the special hooked cam that these cabinets, the locks on these cabinets use. And then down the shaft of this thing, there's a large nut which sits at the base of it to hold the lock body to the door. I want to say that's like a 22 or a 23 millimeter socket, which is what I use to pull those things off. So aside from the hooked cam, these are basically exactly identical to any standard lock you're going to find in any arcade cabinet. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for what I'm going to cover today. So we pulled apart a huge portion of the body, pulled monitors, pulled the doors, disassembled the doors themselves. Yeah, covered a fair amount of the disassembly here, and probably most of this stuff. Again, if you were just digging into it, this is the first time I've pulled one of these things apart, so I'm gonna stumble a little bit here and there trying to figure out how it goes together. But really, ultimately, they're very simple. There's really not much to these things. It seems complicated maybe when you're first staring into them, but once you dig into it, it's not bad at all. So the video might seem kind of elementary, but it's here. Really, again, hopefully it helps someone else. But like, I'm going to be using this as a reference if I can't figure out exactly how something goes together, since I'm going to have several of these things to do. So anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to me ramble on here about these things. And if you want to continue to see more of the rest of these videos that I'm going to be shooting as I move closer and closer towards the restoration on this guy, the subscribe, I think I'm up to 10 subscribers, so, rock on. Thanks, guys. Yeah, hit the subscribe button, and then you'll get notifications when I release the new videos. So yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Any comments, questions, feel free to leave them, and I'll get back to you. Take care. Cheers.